So, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. As you heard, my name is Sebastiano. I'm here co-presenting with
Sebastiano.
Yeah,
Keeping it simple.
Yeah, you got that. So, in this presentation, we're going to try to share some of our experiences when it comes to career choices for software engineers, especially when they grow beyond a certain level. We're going to try to share some tools and maybe actionable tips that will hopefully help you to make the best decision for yourself. And I guess with that, we can start.
Sure. So some of us, most of us, maybe not all of us, surely not me, started our IT and software engineering career in university. Now, at some point, the thing is with university, you finish it or you don't, and you graduate. And that's when you start having to make a living. And to make a living, well, you start working. Now, obviously, when you begin a job, you start from humble beginnings. And in our line of work, in engineering, that's generally you getting hired as a junior software engineer. Maybe you had an internship before, but that's the real first job is most likely going to be a junior. Now, as a junior member of a team, you're able to program, but maybe you're not a big expert on the topics, and you're not expected to do to be the reference for anything. But then as time goes on and you start accruing more experience and you have new knowledge and you become a better coder, you will progress towards what is called by some a mid software engineer. Now, a very important note that I have to make here for the rest of the presentation, we're going to use names, and names are extremely arbitrary. Every person, every company likes to call things in a different way, in a different order. You'll see very specifically that's really the case, but I want to put this clearly. Don't trust the names. We're using standard names, but yeah, mileage might vary. So you've been a mid for some time. You're now a very proficient coder. You are probably the point of reference for at least some technologies in your team. And you are able to mentor other people actively. And you are what we generally call a senior software engineer. And it's been a few years of work. And now you are at the crossroads of saying, okay, what now? What is the next step in my career? Because surely I've gone through all the engineering ladder steps that I could. Now I'm a senior. What comes after senior? Is that a senior, a uber senior, a double senior? I don't know. What happens? Well, in most companies, what is in front of you at this point is essentially a deviation from the engineering career. And if you want to grow inside of the company, you have to focus on the management skills. So for example, if you're a senior software engineer, in many companies, what would be put in front of you as the next step is being an engineering manager. So you start managing people and your coding basically goes to zero or almost zero. And then after that, you're supposed to grow on the management scale. You might become a director, and then maybe you grow again. And then after that, you might become the overlord. I mean, if the company were mine, I would call the person after a director an overlord, but it's not my company generally. But we're here to tell you a very important thing, which is that is not the way it has to be. It surely is the way it's presented to you, especially in Italy. That happens in a lot of companies. We're like, oh yeah, stop playing with computers and become a manager, do a real job or something like that. That's obviously bullshit. Sorry for the French. There's actually other possibilities. For example, you might decide to keep working on your engineering, on your technological skills, and grow from a senior software engineer into a staff engineer. Now, a staff engineer will start working across team boundaries and maybe become the reference for a specific technology in the company. And then after that, you can grow more and become maybe the principal or a principal software engineer, and then grow again. And then you might become the software architect, which is the person that has the big picture in mind and decides what's the general direction technically that the company is taking and a set of teams are taking. And now a very common misconception there is that there's a firewall between the two tracks, that if you're in engineering, you cannot be a manager. And if you're a manager, you cannot do engineering, because obviously they're two completely different things. But the reality is that that's not true. Like, that's a fake wall, and we're here to destroy it.
And thanks to Neptune, as you can see, the wall is no longer there. So things like a senior engineer, for example, deciding to say, or getting a promotion and becoming a staff engineer, and then at some point deciding, look, I want to see what's on the other side of the fence, so I might give engineering management a stab. So they transition to the other track, the people track, and they start managing people. And then they are good at it, so they get another promotion and they start managing other managers, being maybe promoted to being a director. And then again, at some point, they realize, oh, I'm really tired of people. People is a hard topic, you know? So I just want to go back to the safe blankets of technology. And so they decide to go back to tech, and they are moved to a principal engineer, and so on and so forth. So you get the idea. And this is not a new concept. This is something that has been already, let's say, labeled, and it's called the engineer manager pendulum. So it's a concept that essentially envisions an engineer moving back and forth between managing teams and working hands-on on technology. And it's very tricky to pull off in the right way, because you need to stay in a position long enough so that you learn the new skills, but you need to stay in that position short enough that you don't lose the previous skills that you acquired. For example, you don't want to lose your magic touch when it comes to programming. At the same time, you don't want to lose empathy towards your team. So it's a very interesting concept, and it's called the engineer manager pendulum. So if you want to check it out, please take a look at the link that you see in the slide. And this is something that I did at the beginning of the year. So when I have been an engineering manager for close to 2 years, and then at some point I realized, oh, I miss tech, and I want to go back. I want to join the fun again. And that's what I did. And I'm planning to stay in tech for the foreseeable future, but I can already envision that I'm gonna have a niche at some point, and I think I'm gonna feel the urge of, again, moving back to managing people.
Fair enough. And in reality, when we say there's two tracks, that's not really true. As we said, everything is very relative. It's not just the names, but also the tracks. They're not necessarily these two, the people one and the technical one. It's a continuum that joins them both. And in your company, there might be no structure. Like in my company at JetBrains, it's a fairly large company, but there's no very formal structure. Or you might have a very formalized and normed way of progressing, and there might be a framework in place, and we'll see some of them later. For example, you might work in a company where you are taking a role that is neither management nor engineering, strictly speaking. For example, it might be something that is more off of the engineering side of things, and you might be, for example, a team lead, which does have some people management things in it, but also has strong elements of engineering in it. So you keep coding and you manage people. And then after that, well, it really depends. Like, there's a lot of things that are not necessarily normed for everyone, and they're different, and this is definitely one of them. But one useful model that we have to think about this is that we can generally think of three main categories of tracks. There's the management track, what we have called the people track so far. There's the individual contributor track, which is a track that focuses on your contribution as a member of the team. So strongly focused on your engineering skills, so your coding skill, essentially. And then there's a third track that is generally can be the technical leadership. For example, again, you might be a team lead or something more. And we call these three tracks also management, IC, and tech leadership. Now, these are three names we haven't come up with. Those are three names that come from the so-called Trident model. You can read more about the Trident model here. It essentially says that in a company, there's at least three tracks, and one of them might not be, for example, tech leadership. It might be if your company is very strong on data science, you might have a track that is about data science specifically, for example. And yeah, Neptune is happy about this because there's more than two.
And thanks to Neptune again. So we promised you would walk away from this presentation with a few tools that you can use. And the first one that we want to share is called progressions.fyi. So this is a website that essentially collects several different so-called career frameworks from several different companies. What is a career framework? Essentially, it's a written description of how your career can look like and can evolve within a certain company. For example, the fact that you move from a junior to a mid to a senior. And there are many of them for many companies. So not only it is enlightening to check out how diverse a company can envision careers, but at the same time, it's useful to check a company out when it comes to your career, because ultimately that's your responsibility. So let's take a look at an example of how a career framework can look like. So we see immediately that there are two tracks. One is for technical topics, and the other one is for people topics. The beginning is very straightforward. I would say nothing that would surprise us, apart from the fact that the second level of software engineering is not called mid. So again, names are arbitrary, as we mentioned before. But we see immediately that there's a peculiar thing. And to the senior software engineer corresponds the engineering manager. And this I found very atypical, because usually becoming a manager is a promotion. And here it's more like a career change. And then from then on, there's a parallel. So to a staff engineer corresponds an engineering director, and to at the top level, to a principal engineer corresponds the CTO level. This is Kickstarter's career framework. So if you're curious, then please do check it out. This is also on progressions.fyi. But let's take a look at an example at another one. And it's, I would say, radically different, because there are many more tracks. So we see that there's a support track, there's a designer track, a data analyst track. And the nice thing about this one that I found is that let's say there's a role for every level. So there's a correspondence between senior programmer, senior designer, and senior customer support representative. So again, if you're interested, this is a very powerful tool that you can use to check a company out. But then we wanted to also give some tips as to how to understand whether the company that you're currently in, or the one that you're thinking of joining, is a good match for your career ambitions. So the first question that you should ask, or you should find out the answer for, is whether there is a career framework. So the answer might not necessarily be yes. We heard before in JetBrains, this doesn't seem to be really a thing at all. But in case it is, then you might ask whether the natural progression from a senior level is only management, or whether you can continue evolving into the technical track. And whatever the answer might be, you just need to ask yourself whether you're okay with that or not.
Yeah, and it's very important to say, it's not that if there isn't a career framework, the company is not right. It can be all right for you. Like, I really like working at JetBrains, and the fact that there is no career framework for me works well, because I have the freedom of essentially choosing my own path and making my own path. But obviously, that also means that the company has no structure in place already to define what my career path might look like. And the responsibility to grow and to define what my growth looks like, it's solely on me. And for me, that's great, but obviously someone else might not like it. Someone else might want a more structured way to see their personal and career growth.
Very true. And to conclude this kind of profiling questions for companies, something that Seb just mentioned is, are you going to be able to change your career, whether you decide that this is the right thing for you? So say that you want to experience the people management side of things, will you be able to do that? And just, this is a bonus question, but it's actually really important. So does level, or like does a position in a level correspond to another position in the same level? For example, does being an engineering manager correspond on the salary level to being a principal engineer or a staff engineer? Because you might be wary of companies that really do value more titles more than the actual work on the same level. So say that you made up your mind and you want to change from your current track to another one. What do you do? So the first thing that you should be doing is to be talking to your boss. And this is something that I had to do at the beginning of the year. And it was a very enlightening experience for me, because I simply realized that I wanted to transition back into tech, and the conditions were there for me to do such a change, because there was a free spot in the team that I wanted to join. So let's say that the stars aligned precisely at the moment where...
You were lucky.
Yeah, I was very lucky. But especially talking to your boss can be enlightening, because you might realize the conditions might not be there yet, or the company simply doesn't allow for such a thing. So what do you do then? Is it like just all hopes are lost, or not? Well, again, we're lucky enough that we work for a sector where many companies are there. So it's just a matter of picking the right fit for what you want out of your career. So yeah, use the tools that we gave you, or that you hopefully learned about from this presentation, and pick your best fit.
And speaking of tools, just the last couple of tools that we want to leave you with. The first tool that we're going to talk about is levels.fyi. Now, this is a very interesting website, because it allows you to have an idea of how the career ladders and the levels inside of companies match. So, for example, you might learn what the level 5 in Google is equivalent to in Facebook or any other company. You can compare it to any company in their database. And not just that, but it also lets you see the salaries that you might get, the bands that people are in. This is all self-reported data, so take it with a grain of salt. But if you're wondering why the salaries are that high, that's because most of the data comes from the US, where salaries are very much higher than they are in Europe.
So just pay attention if you navigate to this website. You might get a little bit depressed if you're from the European Union.
Or extremely jealous, I don't know.
Yeah, it happens to me both. So,
but it's also interesting because you can look at the various offices that these companies have, and maybe they have one in San Francisco, one in London, and one in Zurich, naming an unknown company. And you might see that actually, if you work in Zurich, you get like 30% less than if you do in San Francisco, even though the cost of life is precisely the same. So all factors to consider when you're looking for a job. And they mostly have data about large companies, but maybe you're looking to work for a big company. And even if this is not the case, there's another website that can help you with the choice, and that is Glassdoor. Now, Glassdoor is very nice in the sense that it collects data about many, many companies, and people that are either currently working at the company or have worked at that company will submit data, not just about their salaries, but also reviews. And they're all anonymous, so they tend to be fairly neutral. Obviously, there's someone with holding grudges that go there and review bombs the company they used to work with, but you can see them and ignore those. And the important thing is that Glassdoor might let you figure out things about the company culture that are not obvious from the outside. So, for example, you might get a tip-off that in this company, it all looks very cool. The offices are cool and everything, but they are terrible at engineering, because maybe they don't care about quality. They just care about pushing stuff out. And maybe that's not your thing. So it's good to know. Or maybe they do have a semi-mandatory crunch culture where you have to work very long hours and you care about work-life balance, as you probably should. So these are all very important signals to look for when you're about to join a company.
I guess that's it.
Yeah,
This is all we have.
we're done.